and welcome back to the Joseph Ryder Anderson podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Anderson, and today we're going to be talking about the latest big Union Arena tournament that just took place over the weekend in Los Angeles, California. So, this was a tournament that I actually myself went to, and it was super fun. It was one of the most fun large Union Arena tournaments large card game tournaments in general that I've been to. And it was really, I think a lot of people are already talking about kind of the huge shift. I think I was just looking at two of the images of the meta breakdown between Bandai Card Fest in Dallas and then this tournament, which was just a couple weeks, just 2 weeks later, I think, the one in LA. And it's pretty crazy the difference that a set can make, right? So I think when you look back at the Dallas regional, it was much more the kind of breakdown. If you look at the top 32, it was much more of the kind of breakdown that you would expect from a Union Arena tournament. One of the great things about Union Arena is just how many decks are playable, and how many different kinds of strategies you can encounter. It kind of makes it really fun, right? Like you never really know what you're going to run into. I think going into LA, however, everyone had Kenshin on their mind. The Roni Kenshin set just came out less than 2 weeks, I think, before this regional, and it was getting a ton of hype. I myself knew Kenshin was going to be a big deal. I felt like purple, as I was getting closer and testing the different decks, I felt purple Saito was going to probably be a pretty popular one. There was a lot of signs pointing towards red Kenshin being a pretty dominant deck, right? I think there's all kinds of things. There's just from playing the deck, you can tell it's a bit advanced compared to a lot of the strategies we've seen before. In terms of, not so much in terms of necessarily playing it, but advanced in terms of how strong it is. It's definitely up there with what the kind of thing that people wanted. I think a lot of people wanted some of these sets that were newer overall for Union Arena, not just for the English version. A lot of people wanted these sets to be a bit stronger in comparison to the existing meta. And we got that with Kenshin, right? We got two very strong decks that have pretty much everything you want from a deck built in. They really feel much more as just a volume 1 kind of thing. They feel much more like complete volume 2 decks in and of themselves. And going into the LA regional, it was pretty clear that red Kenshin was going to be a big deal. We saw amongst a lot of internet chatter about the red Kenshin, a really clear sign to me is if you were to go on TCG Player and see the price for the booster pack, Kenshin was up over $30. I don't know what's at right now, but it was over $30 shortly before the regional, which is a pretty good, clear indicator that a lot of people are trying to get their hands on this card, right? So I felt like Kenshin was going to be a big deal. I didn't anticipate it being, I think it was over 50% of the top 32. I did not anticipate that much. I was kind of thinking more on the 20 to 30% range, which is more in line with what we've seen in the past with a new, exciting new deck. So what I personally did to approach this is I personally just played a ton of battles against red Kenshin. So I do have all the Kenshin decks built. I've had them built for weeks as part of my testing for the content for the site. So I practiced plenty against Kenshin and really learned the ins and outs of that deck. I even actually built a deck to counter Kenshin. It's the green bleach deck with Toshiro and Kenpachi, and that deck goes really, really well into red Kenshin. And it goes super well into red Kenshin because you have the Kenpachi, the 2 action point Kenpachi. A lot of people are talking about Watchdog Man because Watchdog Man can't be moved, but then you got to play Watchdog Man with like Metal Bat or Saitama, but Toshiro is a much better deck, right? So the 2 action point Kenpachi can't be moved, so he is immune to that pushing effect from Kenshin. And he's a free block essentially against that deck. So you have that, but you also have the Toshiro when you play him. As long as you have 6 other 13 court guard squad characters on the field, you're going to freeze your opponent's backline. And that's a strong counter to the 3-cost Kaoru. So altogether, that deck, if you're going into a meta like this one, that deck would be the best one to play. I don't think it's particularly good against Saito. I've tried it against Saito, so that's not the best. But going into Kenshin, it's definitely favorable into Kenshin. So I'd actually built that deck, and I was kind of vacillating. Even during my travel down to the regional, I was vacillating between playing Kenpachi and Toshiro, or playing my favorite deck, which is Yellow Goddesses. And in the end, I just decided, this is probably could be the one and only regional I go to. I really wanted to play my favorite deck, which was Yellow Goddesses. And luckily, I'd played enough rounds against Red Kenshin. I didn't think it was a big deal. I also didn't think it was going to be like half the playing field being Kenshin. So I was like, okay, against all the other decks, I'd rather play Yellow Goddesses personally. So I might as well just do that. And actually that worked out for me because I only ended up playing 2 Red Kenshins, I should say. I did play a purple Kenshin too against the purple Kenshin. But I only played against 2 Red Kenshins, and Goddesses isn't unfavorable enough that that's a big deal, right? I won one of the Red Kenshins and then lost the other off of a raid trigger off of life, which is a bummer. I actually had that game in the bag, and I made a calculated risk. I was like, well, the one card that they could get and I wasn't even thinking about life, honestly. That's one thing I do when I play. I don't think about life. I do like plan if I can. I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to get as many attackers through as possible. That's just like prepping for it, but I don't try to like sit around worrying about what they're going to hit me with out of life, right? But did the calculation, and I was like, okay, there's been 2 of the impact starter deck Kenshins played already. What are the odds of my opponent, getting another one without any draw effects on field, without hardly any cards in the field? And that was the only card that could win in the game. And I was like, he's probably not going to get it. So I let myself get down to 2 life, which was right in striking range of 2 impactors, and lost that one. But the other Red Kenshin I played against, I was able to beat pretty handily. I was able to actually dominate that game all the way through, and that's largely just because I know Goddesses really well. I knew Goddesses better than my opponents knew Kenshin, right? So it's not all about the deck you're playing necessarily, or even the matchups a lot of times. It's just about what you bring to the table as a player. So with all that being said, I think that what I'd like to do for this episode, I've had people ask me before about more like play advice, like gameplay advice. I think a lot of times I tend to talk more about theoretical things and deck building principles and things like that, which is all great. I think this is a great opportunity, since this stuff's still fresh on my mind, to talk a little bit about my experience going to the regional, but also breaking down the matches I faced, some of the things that I came across. One thing I will say before getting into all that is, if you're going to go and play a regional in Los Angeles, one really good thing you can do to set yourself up for success is to not stay at the Moxie Hotel. So I stayed at a hotel called the Moxie Hotel, which I had no idea had like some really elaborate nightclub attached to it. And the music from that nightclub goes until the little hours of the night. And it's really, really loud. It's like it was pulsating in my ears. So I was not able to basically go to sleep until that music stopped. So that's a huge bummer. The night before a regional, I would not recommend staying somewhere like that. Definitely do your research and make sure you're at a nice quiet hotel, because you're going to need your sleep going into these battles. You need to be kind of at full capacity for a 9-round, or I guess it was 8 rounds for this tournament. For an 8-round tournament, you want to be at full capacity. So that was my first mistake. But otherwise, went pretty well. I went 5-3 with Yellow Goddesses, and I think one of the reasons too that I decided to go with Yellow Goddesses is my friend who I was traveling with, who's kind of essentially part of the JWA team. He wanted to play Lancelot, and he was kind of hoping that there wouldn't be a lot of Kenshin. And I told him there was going to be a lot of Kenshin, and he's like, I'm just going to play Lancelot anyways. Because Red Kenshin is favorable into Lancelot. It's not like a slam dunk, obviously. he ended up beating 2 of the 3 Kenshins he played against. So it's definitely not a slam dunk, but it's not favorable for Lancelot. And I was like, well, if he's going to play Lancelot, I can probably play Goddesses, right? Goddesses is less unfavorable into Kenshin than Lancelot is, in my opinion. You don't have to worry about the energy line with Goddesses much. You can kind of just work around that, especially with the way I build it with the Giga Cedar, where I can sack that and free up some room, draw some cards and free up some room on the energy line to be able to push my Goddesses back. So, or my characters, it's not all Goddesses, there's Yu-Gi-Oh in there and such, but so yeah, going into it, definitely a bit worn out from a bit more tired than normal, but I think that didn't really affect my games very much. I think I still played pretty decently. And ended up going 5-3, so X3 for the tournament, which I think I could do better, but I think that was a pretty solid run for Goddesses. I think I'm really excited to hopefully do some kind of a large event post Volume 2 and give that another shot with the same deck. That's sort of my goal. But it was really fun. It was definitely a great way. I've been playing Goddesses since the set came out. Had a ton of success. I'd say more of my wins have come from playing Goddesses than any other deck. So it was a really fun way to kind of end that opening chapter of Union Arena after 1 year of covering this game. So very, very fun. And the atmosphere at the tournament, I will say. Before I get into that, the funny thing is the deck I tested against more than any other is Red Kenshin with Goddesses, and the funny thing is I only played against 2 Red Kenshin. So luckily all the other stuff kind of came in handy, because with Goddesses it's a deck you can't really win with Goddesses without intimately understanding matchups, and a lot of that is just knowing how much life you can get away with taking into certain matchups. Like for example, into Kenshin, into a lot of matchups you kind of want to get to 2 life, because you reach your full strength at 2 life left. But again, into Kenshin you really rarely want to get to 2 life, because there's just too many ways for Kenshin to kill you at 2 life. It's bad enough to be at 4 life, but once you get to 2 life, it's very scary. So that'll get better in Volume 2 for Goddesses when there's a way to add life strategically back. It'll be a whole different kind of a matchup. But as it is, getting down to 2 life is very dangerous against Kenshin. So, but with all that being said, I only faced 2 Kenshins out of my 8 rounds. So I think the lesson to be learned from that is this was a particularly lopsided tournament. I think there was just so much hype around Kenshin, and people had seen that you can win a tournament. I think that tournament that Roy overperformed, no one saw Roy coming. And so people, I think they learned from that, like, oh, new set comes out, we can kind of play the good new deck, and people don't really know how to play against it. I think that was overdone up the wazoo at this tournament. I saw many Red Kenshin players who did not even know basic mechanics with their Kenshin deck. I saw a lot of people who didn't know to tap the Cow River for the draw at the end of the turn. I saw people who didn't know really how the 2 AP Kenshin worked. So that's my opinion of what was going on. I think people are going to look at that breakdown in the meta and just kind of be like, what was going on there? I think a lot of people just kind of wanted to repeat that runaway success Roy had at the tournament that took place shortly after he came out in Full Metal Alchemist. And so I think that was largely going on. I'm not saying that was everybody. I'm not saying that at all. Clearly lots of people probably love Red Kenshin and really wanted to play it. And same thing with Purple Kenshin. I've ran into several players who were like that, who just really understood the deck and really were good at the deck. And that's a smart thing to do too, if you can master a deck that quickly. Or maybe you've been even practicing it. I think I talked to one guy who I played against who said he'd been playing Purple Kenshin for months. So, yeah. With all that being said, I think the really cool thing about the tournament is it was a very, as far as card game tournaments go, it was a very relaxed atmosphere. It did not feel much more intense than going to a store tournament or a rare battle. I think I told my friend that it felt to me kind of like the earlier days of rare battles, when they were a bit more, when that was like the highest level competition. People were kind of buttoned up and taking it seriously, but I didn't have any issues of people like pulling things, like trying to look for ways to take advantage, like, because people will do that, unfortunately. at card game tournaments, people will often like try to find weird little advantages, like, oh, you drew this card wrong, or I think people call it rule sharking or something like that. That's a very, very negative experience to be on the receiving end of that. So I didn't run into anyone who seemed remotely close to doing something like that. People range from courteous to openly friendly. I think that was awesome. I think the Union Arena scene has just been overwhelmingly positive. My experiences in the Union Arena scene have been overwhelmingly positive, and it was great to see at my first Union Arena regional that carried over into the most competitive space, right? So if you're a little on the fence about whether or not you want to step into the arena, pun intended, I would definitely encourage you to do it, because if you feel comfortable at a store tournament, then you should feel comfortable at a regional. It's not a whole lot different in terms of how it feels. It's just longer, but not like way longer, right? I mean, it's maybe like going to two store tournaments back to back. I've been to plenty of store tournaments. I've gone 4 rounds, and so it's kind of like going to 2 back to back. So, and the prizes are great too. You can get, I think I got a little bit of extra prizing for going 5 and 3. So that put me in like the top upper 70 players, I guess. So I got some extra prizing for that, and you get more prizing based on where you go. So, like the Jeremy who went to tournament with me got a couple extra things because he got top 32, which is super awesome. And he went 6-2 to land top 32. And of course, the really cool story is Milo. I don't know if anybody people in the Discord know this, but Milo is a very active member of the Joseph Ryder Anderson Discord. And I've been watching Milo's journey in Union Arena for some time, checking out his deck list. I've always been really impressed with how deeply he thinks about the decks he builds and how deeply he just thinks about Union Arena in general. And the really cool thing about Milo too is that he really loves the community side. Like, he's got a great group of friends he plays with. And so he's kind of about all of it. He's not just about the competing, although obviously he's a fantastic competitor, right? It's very hard to win a 250 plus person tournament like that with a brand new deck, in such a competitive playing field where everybody's like rushing down your throat with these red Kenshin decks, right? But he did a fantastic job. And actually, it's funny because when I think he was at the Dallas Regional and there wasn't any news, and I'd been watching him doing so well. He's winning all these tournaments and coming up with these very unique decks. And I had actually messaged in our Discord, like, hey, did you win the Dallas Regional? Because I'm not like hearing anything. I'm not hearing anything about the Dallas Regionals. Did you win it? Which is funny because, like, that may have seemed like a funny thing to say at the time, but it was a little bit fortuitous, I think, because he ended up winning this regional, which is fantastic. So when I heard it was him, I was pretty elated. I was very, very, very excited. I was very, very excited about Jeremy too, getting top 32. I'm very, very proud that our Discord community, it's definitely a Discord community of people who think very deeply about the game and care very much about doing better all the time. So I think that I'm just super happy to see that, and super happy for everyone's results and it was more people too that I know from my local scene who went and did really well. So all around, it was just a very positive experience. So I would really recommend going to one of these. If you're maybe on the fence about it, definitely check out any regional in your area that you can go to. And I'm sure we're going to have plenty of more opportunities. This was a relatively rushed season, right? Like, I think we just had our first regional in August, and they're just kind of picking up now. So there wasn't a ton of time to do these, but hopefully we have a longer window next year to compete at this level. I think it was a very, very fantastic thing to do. So that was a very long intro into this whole thing, but I think that gives you an idea of what the whole thing felt like. The tournament itself started at 10. I think it wasn't like, one thing too that might be helpful, I wasn't really sure what I was getting myself into with this, right? Especially after hearing the news with the Bandai Card Fest being super long lines and all that. But I think that if you're going to a regional that's a bit smaller, it really is pretty chill. Like, I think I got there pretty early, but I think I could probably have just slept in and gotten there like an hour early, and I probably would have been totally fine. So that's something to keep in mind for yourself. You don't necessarily have to be there at these smaller regionals super, super early if you don't want to, which can help. Getting rest is huge for doing well at a tournament, so definitely prioritize that. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the matches I faced down with SAO Goddesses. So first up, I did face down the Lancelot deck, and luckily this is a deck that I had planned quite a bit around. I had actually altered this deck to beat Lancelot back in the day when Lancelot was the best deck. I think Kenshin very visibly has taken that over for now, but there was a time when Lancelot was the best deck, and so I had made some changes for Goddesses to fare better into Lancelot. One of those changes was adding in the 2-cost Silica to grant that 1,000 BP, which can be really critical in enabling a snipe play into a 5,000 BP Lancelot, or even just a 4,000 BP Lancelot. That's what my opponent did. My opponent tried to play out a raidless Lancelot, 6-cost Lancelot, which if you're a good Lancelot player, that's what you're looking to do, is you're looking to fill up your board with your 6-cost Lancelot's raidless, and then come in with the raided air cavalry to help soften up the defenses and just put a ton of pressure in. So I was able to boost Xenon, my sniping Xenon level 4-cost Xenon, into a 4,500 BP character at 4 life with the Silica. So that was awesome. I was able to attack in to clear out plenty of characters with snipe. So that game I was largely in control of. I think my opponent made one error it's not necessarily, I shouldn't say it's an error. I think my opponent made one judgment call that was probably erroneous that helped me. And this is just largely from probably him not knowing the Goddess deck. And that is, he actually sidelined the Xenon when he played the Air Cav, but left Alifa. So I could just take the hit from the Air Cav and nullify the impact from the Alifa, and keep myself ahead that way. So I think that helped me a bit, but really the changes in the practice I'd done into Lancelot, being able to snipe those bigger characters with Xenon really helped. So that was the Lancelot matchup. Then after that, going into the second round, I did face down the purple Saito, which is a deck that I was very surprised. It's a deck on paper that didn't seem all that amazing to me when I looked at it on paper, but when I played it myself, I was very impressed with what that deck can do. And it was a very hard fight this whole time. And actually, this guy who was playing this turns out is a fan of the podcast. I don't know if he does, like, if he is a reader of the site too. Because if you don't know, JosephRiderAnderson.com is the main thing I do. It's the podcast is sort of an add-on to the website, but really all the main content is on the website. That's where the main focus is. But he was an avid listener of the podcast, so that's super cool. And he ended up getting top 16. And I could tell right away he was a very solid player. Just really had a strong game plan. I could tell into what he was doing. And it came down to really just one card each. It really came down to whether or not he could get that one last six cost Saito off. And I think he did. I think he probably top decked it because he seemed a lot more confident after he drew his card than he did before. But I don't know that. He might have had it in his hand. But he did get the final 6-cost Saito and was able to snipe a character, and then that removed a character so that he was able to get a chump attacker through to win the game. So very, very close. It really, if he hadn't gotten the Saito, I could have taken it. But he did beat me to the punch there, and it was a very fantastic game. So it's always exciting to face down someone skilled like that. And then the next round was against a deck that I really... It's the only deck probably that I faced that I had zero game plan for, and that's the red Attack Titan deck. Obviously I know the general principles of what the red Attack Titan deck does, but I had never played against it with Goddesses before. I think the thing that really I struggled with against it is that I did not have any way to swap the big Attack Titans to the energy line, because my opponent just had a full energy line of two gen characters, and I did not see any Xenon to snipe with. And also Xenon can't really snipe a 5k very easily, right? You need a booster with a Yu-Gi-Oh or a Silica. So the removal and the pressure from that deck, that was the one bad loss I had. In terms of, by bad I mean it really didn't feel close. There wasn't like a trigger could have saved me or a trigger saved my opponent. It was really it was a pretty definitive loss into red Attack Titans. So, but I think in a game like Union Arena, you can't plan for every single deck, right? I mean, there's just too many. You can't master every matchup. You can master the main ones and maybe even the secondary ones, but it's going to be hard going into some of these decks that you've never faced into before. So after that, I played against a Purple Toto, and luckily Purple Toto is a deck that I have practiced plenty against, so I do have a pretty solid game plan going into Purple Toto. I think a really key thing into Purple Toto with Goddesses is just knowing when to play your Lifa. So you really want to play a Lifa in time to preferably stop the swap from Toto. And I did that perfectly. So I think Lifa was actually, I think, the only character on my front line. So it created, no, she wasn't the only character, but she was the only desirable character to swap. Essentially, if he were to swap anyone else, he'd be creating a situation where I had blockers to block him. So by having her out in the field and she can't be chosen, it completely shut down the Toto swap. So I timed that perfectly. I think it was a bit of like instinct from playing against Toto so much, but it was also a bit of good luck on terms of getting the Leaf at the right time. I will also say that with a deck like Goddesses, I think there's other decks like this. For example, the Toshiro Kenpachi deck is similar. But I think with Goddesses specifically, you have your two main characters are Asuna and Sinon. And so the key thing to really know with this deck and in terms of matchups is to know which one of your opponent's attackers to freeze and which one to snipe, right? Like which one is the one you don't want around any longer than you can have than you can afford. And which one's the one that's not so bad to push to the energy line. And so into Toto, the character who's worse for you is Toto. You want to get rid of Toto as quickly as possible. Whereas the Mechamaru is not as big of a threat. Impact typically, unless if it's Kenshin impact is not a big deal for Goddesses to deal with. You can usually take one hit, and you can also typically defend against an impact attacker. Again, with Kenshin, the reason why Kenshin's such a problem is he can push your nullify impacts back very easily. So unless if you've played your Lifa with the no choosing, it's very, very difficult to deal with that. So into Toto, not a huge deal. It's still relatively close, as all games are with Goddess, because you're taking your own life, but not a huge deal there. Next up was against Blue JJK. This was the Sukuna Nanami build. And I've actually had nothing but good luck into Sukuna Nanami, and the reason is that Sukuna Nanami really wants you sidelining their characters so that they can get those effects off that fuel the sideline. But Goddesses is a deck that can very easily get around sending those cards to the sideline, right? Like you can freeze those cards down, put them on the back line with Asuna. You can work around your opponent to snipe other characters with Sinon. So it ends up relatively slowing down the end game play. And also, again, into this deck, the four-cost Lifa came in clutch. I played her twice at very opportune times to block Nanami attacks. So that worked really, really well. Really actually a very fun matchup into the Blue JJK deck. Next, I went against one of my favorite battles of the day, which was into a Blue Hunter deck. And this was a cross between, I wanted the Bomber deck with Genthru, I think is his name, and the Risky Dice or the Specified Slot strategy. So it was like a mix between, it's like a hybrid build. And the reason I liked this game so much was that my opponent was insanely good at his deck. Like he clearly knew Specified Slots or his hybrid version through and through, and it was really fun just to watch him play. Typically, if I'm going up against a deck that I don't know as well, like Specified Slots, again, I get the main principle of it. I get who the key cards are, but it's not a deck that I'm like super like fluid in. So typically in a situation like that, I'd probably like stop my opponent and read the card. So I kind of have some check to like make sure they're not doing something that's like they're just making up stuff, right? I mean, you could theoretically do that. But against this guy, he was so fluid in how he played that I was just like, I'm just going to take his word for what he's doing. Like all these weird things he's doing, I'm just going to take his word for it and assume that he's not like doing something that's not true, because it was so fun to watch him play because he was so good at this deck. And the funny thing is that I bricked bad at the start of this battle. I think I bricked for 2 turns, and he was like, I could tell he was like, let's go, like this is my chance. Like he's bricked. I'm going to like take as much advantage of this as possible. But I was able to hold on at 3 life and come back. I think I was down to like 3 life. That's not from like me taking my own life. That's from getting like beaten up. Basically, I was able to hold on at like 3 life and reverse course and come back for the win into that deck. And I think the key moment where he even said, and now I lose, is I think he had a risky dice that failed and he lost. I think with risky dice, if it fails, you have to like kill your own character, basically sideline your own character. And I think when that happened, he was like, yeah, I'm not going to come back from this. So, but yeah, super fun battle to play into. And I think that it's a great example of somebody who is playing the deck they know and love versus trying to metagame too hard. And I think if you're going to go to one of these regionals, it's better to play the deck you know and love versus trying to metagame, because you just never really know what you're going to come up against. And then after that, I finally worked my way into the Kenshin. So I faced down 2 Kenshins. I already talked about one of them. It was against a guy that I really had control of the match the whole time, but there was one critical moment, and I know from playtesting that there are so many things that can go wrong if you let yourself get down to 2 life. And for some reason, I did let myself. I had an option at one point to take a hit or not, and I don't remember the reasoning for it exactly. I think probably what was going on is I had a really good board built up, and I wanted to put a ton of pressure on him the next turn. And I wanted to basically force him to take impact attacks. And then once those got through, he would basically have to like use his remaining defenders to just block, and it would basically clear out his board. So I was like, basically like, I'm not going to give Kenshin any wiggle room here. I have him on the ropes. I'm not going to give him any wiggle room here. And so I went for the aggressive play, which is a risk. Again, it was a calculated risk because he had already gotten 2 of his starter deck guys out. But as I was swinging in during my turn, I think the first attack hit the starter deck raid out of life, 3 cards left in life, and hit it. And that shut down my offensive. And then it also put a second. He already had 1 impactor on the field, and he put a second one. So I think probably, realistically, I shouldn't have taken that risk. Looking back, I don't know exactly why I did. I probably got a little over aggressive, but I think if they already have, I think it's a good rule of thumb, if you're in that situation, if they already have 1 impact Kenshin on the field, like don't leave it up to chance that they can get a second one on. Do whatever you can to, if they do get that second one, you're going to survive anyways. So I think that was a little bit of an unnecessary risk on my part, but you also can't really control what comes out of life, right? So if that life trigger hadn't been there, he wasn't drawing into it. So, I think it was a fair choice, but it was probably the hardest moment of the night for me, because that was the 3rd loss for me, and it was the one where I was like, okay. The other ones, like the other losses, it didn't feel like there was anything like I could have done differently. Like I feel like I played the game pretty much essentially perfectly on my end. It just didn't work out. But into that matchup, I was like, okay, I could have done something differently. And the funny thing is, when he came swinging in, actually the first card he hit was an Asana raid. And almost always you have an Asana on the field to raid into, right? You have 10 raid targets in my build. So almost always you can hit that raid. And this was the one time that I didn't have an Asana raid target. I think it was my board was so built up. It was all pretty much raided characters. So I did not have an Asana raid target to stop the second impact, which would have won me the game. So definitely a really hard battle to lose, but you do what you can, you move on. I congratulate my opponent, obviously, and that's the game. So moving on to the final battle against Red Kenshin, and this one, the way I approach this one, I think the opening play with Goddesses that's really strong into Kenshin, there's an opening play to look for. And one thing that Kenshin does, it's very notoriously does this, is Kenshin puts up a 3000 BP attacker or a 3000 BP character to essentially stop you from taking any life. It's the only deck right now that can do that. usually like a 2000 BP character is strong enough to stop your opponent from an early game attack, but a 3000 BP character is pretty darn safe. And so luckily I know this about Red Kenshin, and so I always start with my stronger character up. I think in this case though, I actually started with an Asuna. Typically I'll start with a Sinon because she's 2000 and it's easier to boost her with the Yu-Gi-Oh! But I started with the Asuna, bumped her up, and then I played 2 Yu-Gi-Oh! So she became a 3500 BP character. So I was able to take the aggressive play from the start, and I was able to use my 2-cost Sinon to snipe the lower cost characters. Basically just took a really aggressive front against Kenshin, and usually Kenshin wants to be the one being the aggressor. So if you can kind of take that footing first, it can kind of put your opponent on the on the edge, kind of not sure how to deal with that. So but basically just from then on just controlled the game. I don't really remember actually that battle the best, because it was one of those battles where you're pretty much just in control the whole time. He did at one point scare me because he had a turn towards the end where he got off 3 finals not 3 finals from life, but he got off 3 AP extends in a single turn and really came back to build up his board and threaten me. But it still wasn't enough to close out the game for him. So I did win that one. So yeah, in the end, 5-3, I think I was like 75th overall. So, or 76th overall. Sorry, I was 76th, I think, overall, which is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that for my first Union Arena Regional. I would love to do better next time. But the really cool thing is being able to be there for this game just about a year, I think a little over a year after I first got into it. I was at a shop, local shop, and someone was opening bleach packs, and I was like, I think I saw the Toshiro Hitsugaya alt art, and that just spoke to me like crazy. And I was like, and then luckily a friend of the shop was like, hey, you gotta try this game out, and I played it and was pretty hooked right away. And then I came back, and I came back another time, met Jeremy, tried the game out. So some more. So it's been a year, and it's been super fun creating tons of content, meeting tons of people because of Union Arena. And I even got to meet a lot of fans of the site at the event. So I really appreciate everybody who said hi. I got to also take a picture with the winner, Milo. That was awesome. So I'm very, very excited to have had that opportunity. And I think too, also just having people from the Discord community do so well that just made me so happy. Super, super happy to see that. And also just to see how great the scene was in general. It was just for a card game tournament, it was a relatively relaxed scene. I mean, people were coming up before the tournament just to hang out, chat about decks, play test decks. It really is, if you love Union Arena, going to one of these regionals is going to be really a crowning moment for you, I would say. So if you haven't been to one yet, definitely try to go to one. They can be a little hard to get into. I know with it can be hard to get a ticket, but definitely do whatever you can. There's also side events too. So if you don't get into the main event, they do have side events going on. So you can always stop by for that at one that's close to you. So with all that being said, I hope that was helpful for you. Again, usually I'm talking more theoretically about meta and bigger picture things. So hopefully kind of getting into the nitty gritty of just the round by round of the tournament was kind of exciting and interesting. And with all that being said, you can always find more stuff on the website, josephryderanderson.com. Join the Discord, like and subscribe on YouTube, all that good stuff. And until next time, keep on battling.